Oh shit. I'm fine. Put me down. Hillary, put me down.
Pretty funny stuff there, isn't it? Pretty funny stuff. I love Obama being the subject of so many memes. Good morning. Happy Friday. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Good to see you all this morning. Good morning, Linda. You're up bright and early. Yeah, I'm so happy it's Friday. I could not even begin to tell you. I don't know if I've had a happier Friday in quite some time. I am completely exhausted. It has been a really long week for me, probably to some of you as well. Hopefully, I can get through the show today without coughing the entire time. But yeah, busy week. I again so thrilled it's Friday. I've got so much to do. I don't know about you guys. We're gonna have more, severe heat again today. It's kind of strange, but I like the heat. I was probably out a little bit more yesterday than what I'm normally out. Not, doing too much, just going outside a little bit. Good morning, Joe. I like the heat, but at the same time, I'm ready for it to go. It's going to cool off a lot next week. I know this heat is really hard on a lot of people, and God knows I've got a lot to do outside. Oh my goodness, Drew Collins on the comment line. Tell Donald Trump to release the files. Well, Drew Collins, the files will be released now, probably. We're going to talk about that here shortly. Elaine Maxwell seen carrying a mystery box that appears to be files. We're going to talk about that. Lots of things to talk about, that's for sure. As always, yesterday, Donald Trump visiting the Federal Reserve. I haven't seen him visit Fort Knox yet. I thought we were going to go to Fort Knox and see all the gold or all not the gold. Never did see that trip take place, but yesterday, of course, Donald Trump did visit the Federal Reserve with Powell. I'm going to play a little video clip there here in a little while. Those two do not get along at all. He does not like Jerome Powell at all. And I don't blame him. That guy is the reason why our interest rates are so incredibly high, and he refuses to lower them. And Trump is going to hammer at him until he leaves. No question about it. Good morning, Rob. Good morning, Tammy, Jerry Hoover. Hope you guys are all having a happy Friday. I'm looking out the window. It's pretty. I was kind of hoping we'd get a little bit of rain, but I don't know about you guys, and I don't know a lot about gardening. I'm kind of learning as I go. But my tomato bushes or plants, I should say, all looked so beautiful and green. And then I went out there last weekend. I thought, man, I need to get these tomatoes tied up. They're growing tall, starting to flop over, and I've just been so busy. So I went out and I pruned them fairly heavily, which is what you're told to do, to pull off all those lower branches, the tomatoes up on top, the lower branches at the bottom. So I did that. I pruned them pretty heavily. Got them all tied up. I put my little tea stakes up and did everything I was supposed to do. They look absolutely awful right now. The tomatoes themselves look fine, but I did the heavy pruning. Now all of a sudden there's like yellow leaves even up above where I had pruned, and I didn't leave a lot left. So I don't know what's happening. I hope I didn't kill my tomato plants. I really hope I didn't. But I think it's more to do with that heavy rain. My soil is very heavy. It's clay, silt, loam. And when it's really wet, when I walk out in the garden, my feet sink completely down about 5 inches, and then it's like concrete because of all the clay. But things grow really well around here. So I had no doubt that my garden would grow well. I think there's a lot of nutrients in the soil. And so I've never had any problem, actually things taking root and growing, because God knows some of the weeds and grass here are impossible to kill. They survive in these soil conditions. But what's so strange to me though now is I don't understand how all this works. We had that super heavy rain, which absolutely soaked my garden, and I know that clay and silt loam really holds the moisture well. And so this super hot weather, I've been going out there looking at the soil. I'm like, it does not look dry. So despite 105 heat index, it does not look dry. So I've watered it very minimally, but I almost feel like the more I water it, the worse it is. My poor green prep peppers look all droopy and sad. And I thought, oh, they're probably dry. But then when I put some water on, the water just sat on top of the ground. It didn't soak in, which makes me think that maybe the ground is still saturated from all the rain that came through, because it's not only is my garden sitting on top of a water table, just a few feet below, but I don't think it takes a lot to saturate. So I think today I'm just going to leave well enough alone, and I am not going to go out there and do any kind of watering. But I really wish I knew what the answer was. But unfortunately, I do not. I do not. Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Cindy. Good to see you. Good morning, Karen. Good to see you all. Again, happy Friday. Lots to talk about today. So we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. Things continue to unfold on so many different levels. I feel like we're at this really weird pivotal point where all of these things are like ramping up, ramping up, ramping up. And it's like, where do we go from here? The situation with Donald Trump and Jerome Powell going to the Federal Reserve yesterday. I'm going to play a little clip of that. Some of you probably have seen it already. These two don't get along. And in the end, I'm going to assume that Donald Trump is right here, even though Powell tells him he's wrong. Good morning, Kim. So let's take a look at this. And we're going to talk about this for just a couple of seconds before we move on, because we've got a lot to talk about today.
Billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1.
3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added.
Our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building. Is what that is. That's a third building.
Well,
including
no,
the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's
So,
not new.
So we're going to take a look.
Those two. Isn't that funny? I don't know who's right. I'm assuming Trump's right. I can't imagine he would go to this meeting and challenge Powell and not be correct. But it's pretty funny to see them going back and forth. And I kind of keep waiting for the day that he pushes Powell out and then puts someone in that we really need there so we can lower these interest rates, because we all know the only reason why he's not lowering those rates is because Donald Trump is president. He doesn't want to give Donald Trump any credit for having the interest rate lowered under his term. Good morning, Roberts. Good morning, Trish. Good, Ann. Good to see you. Good morning, Dottie and Sherry. Hope you guys are all having a good morning. I will be happy to see Powell go. I'm sure all of you will also. We've got to get those interest rates lowered. It's harming a lot of Americans. We've just got to get it done, whatever that takes. We know good and well that Powell and Trump do not get along. And Trump, he's definitely struggling trying to get all of the right people into the right places. He's done a fantastic job so far. We all know if he got the right person in the right place in this position, that we would see those rates drop. Now, as you guys probably remember, there is a lawsuit from Azoria Capital. We talked about that yesterday, against Jerome Powell, saying that they've been holding closed door meetings with the Federal Reserve, and that those meetings are supposed to be public, should have always been public. And so this coming week, that meeting, we'll see, will they allow the meeting to be public, or will they once again shut those doors? I would love to be part of that meeting to see exactly what's going on. Good morning, Matt. Good to see you. Good morning, Kim. Hope you guys are all having a good Friday. So I want you to see this. James Comey. I mean, this guy is so shifty, and I love the FBI. I really do. I love all the field agents for the FBI. But like any other organization, when you start making your way to the top, doesn't matter if it's a company, if it's the government, if it's the FBI, a law enforcement organization, the military, when you get to a certain point, it's all about politics. And you do not continue to move up the ladder unless you're ready to play the game. Comey has always played the game, no question about it. You got to see this interview because just look at his eyes like shifting back and forth. This guy needs a psychiatric evaluation. Let's take a look at this here.
Trump and the hacks who lead the Department of Justice are hammering at the dam day after day, trying to turn it into just another gold leaf covered Trump subsidiary. Our best hope is that good people will stay and do what Maureen asked. Have the courage to do the right thing always. You may get fired for acting that way, but there's honor in that, and nothing but disgrace for those who don't stand up. There are going to be hard weeks in the Trump era, and this was one for my family. But there are plenty of good people still in the department committed to doing things the right way, committed to the rule of law. For them, because of them, keep the faith.
Oh, that makes me lose the faith, doesn't it? Make you lose the faith. This guy belongs in Gitmo, no question about it. Robert says, what's going on is we are in a debt spiral without an answer. War has always been involved when this happens. Yeah, we need a good war, don't we, to bring the money in? I'm sure that's what Democrats are saying. Where's the war? Because God knows everybody makes money off of war, don't they? And Robert says, snake charmer, you got that right. I'll tell you what, Comey, his daughter, of course, recently fired from her position, no question, over the Epstein files. So this guy Comey is going to tell us that we are supposed to trust what's going on. And he's trying to reach out to his fellow law enforcement officers that are still hanging in there. Most of those guys are on our side. Most of those guys, and by guys, I mean ladies and men, are on our side. Law enforcement in general is on our side. If somebody's getting fired, it is because they are on the wrong side and they supported someone like Comey, which is really a shame. And I was watching a video this morning. I'm going to share a small portion of it with you just to go to show who these people are protecting. Under the Joe Biden administration, we keep getting these numbers of all the missing children. And by missing children, these are the children that came across the southern border unaccompanied. They're called unaccompanied minors. I remember back during Obama's term reporting on the number of unaccompanied minors entering our country. There were times where, we had up to 50,000 unaccompanied minors, anywhere from infants, all the way up to 17 years of age, coming across this border every single week. Some people say every single day. Unaccompanied minors, they get into the system, and we never see them again. Now, under Donald Trump, if you recall, Democrats were freaking out. Oh, there's 1,500 kids missing from the system. And those weren't kids that were missing. Those were kids that we were DNA testing under Donald Trump's term, if you can recall. So when a family member said, hey, this unaccompanied minor, you have them in custody, we would go out and seek out those family members. They would come in, they would give a DNA sample. We would prove that they were related. And then those children would be sent with that family member because they matched by DNA. So we knew who they were. And yes, there were about 1,500 kids that we couldn't locate, but it wasn't because they ended up in the hands of traffickers. It was because the family members who picked them up were here illegally. They didn't want to be caught, and they probably thought it was a trap that, oh, come pick up your, nephew who's come across our, the border illegally by himself because he's 10 years old, and we don't want to put him in the care of a foster home. He's your blood relative. Please come pick him up. And then they thought, well, gee, I'm not here illegally. They're going to know where I'm at if they can continue to track the child that's with me. And so therefore, they would kind of disappear off the radar. But we at least knew that those 1,500 kids were with family members. Now, we were told that under the Joe Biden administration, about 320,000 kids were missing. These are unaccompanied minors, again, anywhere from the age of infant, from the age of 0 up to the age of 17, or well, technically 18. Now we learn that number is actually a lot higher. It's about 400,000. Think about that, 400,000 children that came across the border under Joe Biden's term who have disappeared because they stopped DNA testing. They just took the word for it that these people were their family members. Now we have no idea where these children have ended up. And I don't know if you guys heard this news or not last week that came out. I didn't talk about it on this show because I didn't have, I wasn't here other than one day last week. But it came out that the Biden administration set up a hotline, and the hotline was for all these children. So these children were sent off with people who were presumed to be family members. We don't know, sometimes just a foster care type situation. And they told these children, hey, call this phone number. If you have any problems at all, call this phone number and we will be sure to investigate. We'll make sure that you receive help. Well, then it was determined that 65,000 calls came into that number, but no one was on the other end. No one was answering those calls. These kids were leaving voicemails saying, I'm being sexually assaulted. I'm being exposed to drugs. I'm being trafficked. And these are real calls. They're real calls. And guess what happened? No one answered. No one investigated. No one came to the rescue of these children. 65,000 calls. Now, the Trump administration is now in possession of those 65,000 calls. Some of them have been released. One in particular, it was hard to listen to. It was a little boy who called in to this hotline, and he said that he had adult men coming into his room at night and sexually assaulting him, and no one was on the other line answering those calls. And now under the Trump administration, they conducted an investigation. They went out, they picked up that child, they removed him from that situation along with several others. But unfortunately, how many of those kids aren't here anymore? How many of them will never be found? 65,000 calls coming in and having no answer. Can you imagine how abandoned those children felt when they were given a number and said, hey, if you need help, call us? Nobody on the other line. It's really sad. Robert says, bigger scandal than Watergate. There are so many, Robert, bigger scandals than Watergate going on right now. Good morning, Michelle. Larry says, good morning. Do you think they're going to force Maxwell to testify? I think we're getting there. I think now that we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But first, before we do, I want you to hear this man speak. And Kim, it makes me sick too. This is J.J. Carroll. He is a former law enforcement officer. He's going to talk about child trafficking under the Biden administration. And it makes me sick too. Now, this is a long interview. I'm only going to play a few minutes of it or a few seconds of it, just so you get a general idea of what he's going to talk about. Everybody wants to jump on Trump about this or that. Oh, Donald Trump, he's a sex offender. He's listed in the Epstein files. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But here we know for a fact what was happening under the Biden administration. Just take a listen to this here. Hopefully I'm pulling up the right video.
I state without reservation that the United States federal government is the world's largest child sex trafficking organization in modern history. The probability that thousands of these UACs are being raped at this very moment is 100%. Chairman Higgins, Ranking Member Correa, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Ivey, and the members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the evil of child trafficking caused by the open border policies under President Joe Biden and his administration. I served in the United States Border Patrol for 24 years until I retired as a Deputy Patrol Agent in charge in San Diego sector. I worked under 5 presidential administrations, and only one president secured the border, President Donald Trump. Border Patrol agents went from working and being supported by the greatest border president in American history to the worst, President Joe Biden. My last year in the Border Patrol was Joe Biden's first year in office. On his first day in office, I watched in disbelief as 94 executive orders cascaded down from Washington, D.C., obliterating every immigration policy that had been provided the most secure border in America's history. Border Patrol agents were forced to carry out unconstitutional orders that violated every law in the Immigration Nationality Act. President Biden, through Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, created policy out of thin air, ignored federal immigration law, and facilitated the largest mass invasion into America that the world has ever seen. The United States of America will have spent hundreds of billions of dollars in 4 years to fund the needs of over 50 million illegal aliens that populate our nation. Between 1 in 6 and 1 in 7 residents in America is an illegal alien. America has suffered.
So I want to backtrack here a little bit. The actual number, Stephen Miller yesterday gave an interview and he said the actual number, 450,000 children missing under the Biden administration, what they refer to as UACs, unaccompanied minors that have entered into this country. We don't know where these kids are. Now, the Trump administration has, not surprisingly, has recovered over 13,000 of these children. But can you imagine the massive effort that's being undertaken to try to locate 450,000 kids? And who knows, that number could grow from there. If you think that at different times there were 50,000 unaccompanied minors crossing our southern border every week, maybe, some people say again every day. Where are these kids at? How much more is that number going to grow? Why would the Biden administration just release these kids to anyone who came and said, oh, yeah, oh, this is my kid? It's just a system that's set up for sex trafficking of minors. We know exactly what's going on. A lot of these kids end up homeless on our streets. And I can't even imagine a parent who would take their child and send them across the border illegally, for one, and two, without any type of guardian or parent. And a lot of these kids, I'm going to spare you the gory details. A lot of these children never even make it across the border. I can't tell you how many stories I've read, and I'm sure if Colonel Joe Adams was with us today, he would explain as well how many kids have been found tied to trees who have been gang raped, little bitty children, by these folks who are coming across the border. Because we have to remember, a lot of the people coming across our border illegally are criminals. They're cartels, they're traffickers. They don't care about the lives of these children, but yet we have parents entrusting their children to these coyotes and people bringing them across the border. It's absolutely insane. Robert says if the citizens don't trust their government, then civil unrest is in our future. I can see states wanting to leave the union. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, Robert, yesterday. I'm not sure if you're here, where at one point we talked about how whether or not, this was before the election, how whether or not Donald Trump won, there would probably be a civil uprising regardless. If he didn't win, we would probably be the ones, uprising. If he did win, then it's going to be the other side. And people want to say, well, that's not happening. There's nothing happening. And that's just not true. The fact is, there's a lot happening. We're just not seeing it on the news anymore. Some of those protests, like let's say in the Los Angeles area, around the country, are still happening. Just because it's not in the news every day doesn't mean it's still happening. We still have these idiots standing out in front of ICE facilities, attacking ICE officers. Look how many ambushes have taken place recently. I just read yesterday about an ambush against some ICE agents, and it's not even on the news anymore. The media doesn't want to report it. It's becoming so common that it's not even news anymore. The ICE agents that are stabbed, shot, attacked, ambushed, not even on the news anymore. You got to blame the media to some degree, because yes, even though it's becoming more common, you should still make a point of talking about those cases every single time they happen. So the way I see it is there is an uprising that is occurring. Now, what do we do about it is the question. And I'm sure that the Trump administration has a plan of action. We know they've got these multi-jurisdictional task force out there doing their job, doing a fantastic job, not only recovering these children, but also going after the criminals. I just heard a story today. I don't know if you guys did, about that one company. I don't buy their stuff. It's just so crazy expensive. Is it Lululemon? I think that's how you pronounce it. I always thought it was Lululemon, but I think it's called Lululemon, and they sell athletic wear. Well, I just heard that they're very close to closing, to just saying forget it, closing shop, because they have allowed all of these criminals to come in and steal from them, and they don't do anything about it. And they have been the victim many, many times over of these lootings where you just see, 100 people storm their shop and just grab and take everything that they can. And they don't do anything. They don't try to arrest these people. They don't necessarily cooperate with investigators in getting these people arrested. Well, they're about to lose their company because of it. I just read a story about crime in the UK. We haven't talked about crime statistics here in the United States in a while. I don't feel that crime has gone down, and the reason why is because so many of these liberal mayors and liberal governors aren't doing anything to fight crime, which is exactly why, of course, the Trump administration is suing the city of New York right now because the police officers want to do their job and cooperate with ICE, but the governor Hochul, she says, nope, not going to happen. We're not cooperating, so we have no choice but to sue them. I know that local law enforcement, they want to do their job, not just in cooperating with ICE, but also they want to do their job to stop these criminals. Do you think these police officers like no cash bail? No, of course not. Their lives are the ones that are on the line, and we the people, it's like, well, what in the world can we do outside of if you see something, say something. There's not a whole lot that we can do. But in the meantime, I've not heard a lot of crime statistics as far as whether crime has gone up or gone down. I would have to say, based on what I'm seeing, I don't think that crime statistics have changed that much. I was just reading over in the UK how crime is so incredibly out of control that there are people just walking in and out of the stores, just taking what they want. They don't even bother going to the cash register anymore. And here in the United States, we do see that happen, but it's not, 5, 6 out of 10 customers. But in the UK, they're really facing some serious problems. And we're probably just a step behind that because we don't do anything. I have a friend who's a law enforcement officer in the city of St. Louis, and he told me a story once that he was at a Quick Trip and he was in the Quick Trip, not in uniform, off duty. And he saw these guys come in, go over to the beer case, load up with cases of beer, and just walk right out of the store. So he, being the great police officer he is, walked up behind them, had his badge, did not draw his weapon. But as he started to walk towards the door to confront these guys, they pointed a gun at him. And of course, he backed down. What is he supposed to do? And he asked the store clerk, aren't you going to call police? I'm an off duty police officer. Nope. We don't do anything. We don't do anything about it at all. And now you might not consider that an uprising, of course, but our country's crazy. It is. People are out of their minds, completely out of their minds. Good morning, Phyllis. And Robert says, we're fine to Larry. Fox News reported this morning that Maxwell answered all DOJ questions without taking the fifth once, so we shall see. We shall see. Deputy, of course, Attorney General Todd Blanche met with Maxwell yesterday. He's going to meet with her again today. There was video photos of her going back to her cell in Tallahassee carrying a box. Now, it reminded me of if you go to the post office, they have those clear containers with the handles. It kind of looked like something like that. So I'm wondering if he gave her some files, copies of files to look through, to maybe talk about. The latest development is we all know that the Wall Street Journal made that post about Donald Trump and had that, it was like a birthday card that went to Epstein where he drew the figure of a woman and made some unsightly comments and so on. And Donald Trump, of course, absolutely denied that he ever wrote that card, that he ever made that little doodle. He said, that's just something I don't do. And of course, he sued the Wall Street Journal for reporting that it was him and his signature. He said it was all fake. But now what's happening is the Wall Street Journal, they're kind of saying, no, it was really Donald Trump's letter. At least we're told it was. But then they also revealed other information that what it was is this letter that allegedly Donald Trump had sent to Jeffrey Epstein, a birthday card, was part of a book. I guess Maxwell made Epstein a book of birthday cards. And it's a lot of notable people, Alan Dershowitz, some guy named, what was it, Mort Zuckerman? I'm not sure who that is. He owns some kind of media company, Bill Clinton. And of course, we're going to hear a lot more about this book of birthday cards that was put together, for Epstein, and Trump's card, of course, was included in that. So I don't know. I don't know. Are we going to hear some other people come out and say, "Well, that wasn't really me. That wasn't really my card. I didn't really do that"? Or do we assume that Donald Trump is telling the truth, that he really did not write that? That Maxwell included that card in this book, not knowing for sure that Donald Trump wrote it? I don't know, but we're probably going to find out. Jay says they would rather pass the cost on to the consumer over pursuing criminal charges and what they think is negative publicity. You're right, Jay, because anytime people come in and steal, guess what happens? That charge is absolutely passed on to you. Some stores, when I was spending a lot of time in California a couple years ago, I would go to various stores. Let's say if you went to a Walmart in California, everything was locked up. I mean everything. If you had to buy makeup, you had to go to a special area. You could not leave the makeup section without paying for it. If you went to buy hair care, you had to pay for it in that area. And even like the shredded cheese was locked up. That's how bad theft is in parts of California. I think that was in Santa Ana, where I came across that situation. But they absolutely do pass it on to the consumer and insurance companies too, because the stores file insurance claims, and that makes everybody's insurance rates go up. But back to the situation with Maxwell. So Todd Blanche is going to talk to Maxwell again today. Yesterday we talked about the House Oversight Committee, who is going to subpoena, all of these different folks in the Epstein case. I've heard that Bill and Hillary Clinton have already received their subpoena to testify. So we'll see how that comes about. Of course, the courts are trying to block the grand jury testimony from being read. And, and I think we're going to see more. Now, I'm kind of trying to be careful how I phrase this, because I want to make sure people understand that even though, yes, I am absolutely 100% sure that Donald Trump's name has been mentioned several times in the Epstein files. Now, my personal opinion is that is absolutely why we have not yet seen the Epstein files. I absolutely do believe that Donald Trump stepped in and said, you cannot release these files to the American people because it's going to make me look really bad. Now, that being said, I don't think Donald Trump, again, I said this many times before, I don't think Donald Trump ever harmed anyone. I absolutely do not think he was ever involved in any sexual assault of anyone or had any intimate relationships with any minors. And I don't think any of the evidence supports that either. However, we know how they turn things around. And that's exactly, I'm sure, what he's worried about. And Larry says it'll be interesting to hear what she's got to say. Yes, it will. Good morning, Elizabeth. Good morning, Nancy. Happy Friday to you. Linda, let's see. Ruby ribbon is closing. Been wearing it since 2017. I should be set for a few more years. Also, still don't know if volunteer programs will be funded. Still no regrets. I would not trade Trump for any Democrat. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, Linda, about your program closing. I know a lot of different programs, even ones I support, did absolutely close due to lack of funding, because that was part of the Doge cuts. There were some good things that were lost during the Doge cuts, as well as the bad. We got to take sometimes the good and the bad, and hopefully anything that was positive before those Doge cuts is somehow restored so that we can go back to those programs, a lot of them being programs for seniors and for children and in the arts and different things. I know people who, lost program funding through these different Doge cuts. So I am sorry to hear that. But we do have to take, unfortunately, the good with the bad, the good with the bad. And we did more good with the Doge cuts than bad. So that's also something to think about. Glenn says, why didn't Biden admin release Epstein files if it would harm Trump? Because I don't think it does harm Trump. I don't think there's anything in there that harms Trump. I think that Democrats can twist it if they want to. I think they didn't release the files because they're all named in the files. And they didn't want to just release files with just Trump's name, because then they'd have to release everything. I think there's far more Democrats named in those Epstein files. And I think the Democrats that are named in the Epstein files are guilty of trafficking women and assaulting minors. I really do. Donald Trump, I think, this is a personal thing. Think about that. We all know who Donald Trump is, don't we? I think he's a good person. I think he's a great person. I've actually met him. I didn't get any weird, creepy vibes from the guy at all. That was a long time ago, of course, when I was, working with his campaign back in the year 1999, way back when. And when I was like 5, right? My wish. But, here's the thing with Donald Trump. I think we all got to get a good deal of his personality. He's a very proud man. Of course, he doesn't want anything negative coming out about him. He has dealt with the media twisting things about him for probably his entire life. He's always dealt with that. The media gets a hold of Donald Trump's name. Remember all the stuff, even before he was running for president, the things that they would say about him. They would always twist and turn things to make him look bad. And I think that he knew that that would be the situation here as well. And I think the Democrats didn't release the files because there's nothing in there scathing against Trump. Okay, yeah, like I said yesterday, he and Jeffrey Epstein attended some parties together. They run in the same circles. I go to a lot of places in St. Louis and I see people run in the same circles of people who I know are drug dealers, who I know are drug addicts, who I know promote prostitution. I see these people at places. I know who they are. I'm probably in photos with some of these people. The FBI one time contacted me because someone I knew and was in a very loose circle with was out prostituting women across the St. Louis area. And I'm like, yeah, I know those people. I see them when I'm out. I don't call them on the phone. I don't talk to them. I don't invite them to my home. They've never invited me to their home. I had no idea, that they were doing these things. But that's just it. Sometimes you go to places and let's say St. Louis, of course, is much smaller fishbowl than New York City or Palm Beach. Palm Beach being a very tiny fish hole, by the way. I've been to Palm Beach, the island, many times, and everybody goes to the same couple of clubs because there's not a lot there to choose from. And I was at those same clubs, and you see the same people every day. St. Louis is no different. New York City is no different. People congregate in the same areas, especially people in the situation of Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, where they were more elite and they ran in those same elite circles. Those people hang out in the same places. And I absolutely believe Donald Trump when he said, yes, back in the day, we ran in the same circles. Epstein, yes, I invited him to my wedding with hundreds of other people. And yes, we did associate with her at one time with each other, but I had no idea he was doing these things. I do believe Donald Trump, quite honestly. And I would tell you if I didn't, because I don't have any problem going against Donald Trump if it's something that he does that I don't like. Glenn says, did he sniff your hair? Donald Trump, does he sniff hair? Not Biden. Biden's a hair sniffer. Donald Trump did not sniff my hair. He shook my hand, and that was pretty much it. I presented him with a Trump for 2000 button. He was very nice. And Melania, by the way, I think it was Melania at the time, was with him. And so Donald Trump, I think, has finally come to terms that he cannot, the public knows his name is in those files. Like we said yesterday, the FBI worked very hard to delete a lot of the evidence against the folks that really matter, leaving Donald Trump in there to bear the brunt. I absolutely do believe that Donald Trump knew Jeffrey Epstein in circles, not closed circles. And then once he realized that Epstein was a pedophile, he banned him from Mar-a-Lago, never spoke to him again. In my opinion, end of story, right? End of story. And Larry says, September promises to be a very interesting month with everything going on. You got that right. Robert says, when Trump posed as a Democrat, they loved him. Yes, didn't they? Larry says, you probably remember a mutual friend, Psycho from Troy. Larry, I don't. I remember some weirdo that stalked me in Troy, if you know who I'm talking about. But I don't know. There's a lot of weird people out there, so I don't know. And so Donald Trump allegedly has recently said, and this goes along with what we're just talking about with how Donald Trump probably feels about these Epstein files. He said, they're going to accuse me of some funny business. Even though I had nothing to do with it, they're going to F me anyway. And I'm sure that's exactly how he feels, because that's what he's had to live with his entire life, is the twists and the turns of everything he does and everything he says. So we got to be careful that when we see his name coming out in these files, that we're going to have to really do some serious thinking about it and think, okay, And I'm not telling anybody to glaze over the topic, but if you see Trump's name coming out, and you're going to see that a lot, in the coming days, weeks, months, as we learn more about these Epstein files. But I think that you're going to have to really use some discernment and say, okay, like the Wall Street Journal situation, Donald Trump is suing the Wall Street Journal. He says that he did not write that letter to Jeffrey Epstein. He did not draw that figure of the woman. And I believe him. I don't know if you do or not, but I believe him. How it came to be, I don't know. So you're just going to have to use that discernment going forward and try not to focus on Donald Trump's name being in those lists. However, now that the cat's out of the bag and we all know his name is in those files, then we have to kind of, switch gears here and start thinking, okay, we know he's in there. Don't think he's guilty. He stepped away from Epstein. So now where do we go with this? Now we look at the people who really are the criminals, the people who did take advantage of these young women, and I know they're doing their best to eliminate the names out of these files. That's why they claim they don't want to release them. They don't want to harm the victims. Well, most of the victim testimony is already public. So I have read countless testimony from victims of Epstein that's public. And some of these girls went through some horrific things. Some of these women went through some horrific things. And I understand protecting the victims, of course. And there's many more victims than we've heard about, or testimonies than we've read. There's a lot of information out there. But what I would really like to see is I would like to see people punished. And what really bothers me, we kind of touched base on this yesterday, so I don't want to, carry on too much about it, but is that Democrats have known for a long time that their Democrat leaders are listed in the Epstein files. We talked about this yesterday. Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. A lot of these folks have been talked about for years. We've always known they're in the files. We've always known the accusations against them, but Democrats just don't care. They like Bill Clinton anyway. They like Hillary Clinton anyway. They would have voted for Hillary Clinton knowing that she's been to Epstein Island, knowing that she's in these files. And so that's the difference between us and them, is that, yes, Donald Trump's name might be being passed around, but we know he separated himself from Epstein a long time ago. Bill Clinton didn't. Bill Gates was friends with Jeffrey Epstein up until the day the guy died, literally, if he really did die. But nobody wants to talk about that, do they? Glenn says, I missed something. And when did we find out his name is in the files? Well, I think everybody knows at this point, Glenn, there's been countless mentions now of Donald Trump's names being in the files. The Wall Street Journal has reported it. There was you may not have been listening to the show that day, but I played an interview from CNN where they interviewed a woman who was, it was a big story. It was a bunch of BS. Trump didn't do anything wrong other than she felt intimidated by him because he was in an office with Jeffrey Epstein. And I played that interview, and this woman said that she's glad that the files are being released because she's been waiting for 30 years to tell her story about Donald Trump and his connection to Jeffrey Epstein. She's one of a few women who have come forward who said that they gave testimony during these investigations against Donald Trump. Now, CNN, MSNBC, they're all kind of running with these interviews with a couple of different women. I've listened to the interviews. I'm not going to play them all. You can go out and find them if you want, because it's all just, like I said, it's all just a bunch of BS. There's nothing in there where these women are saying that Donald Trump even touched them, even sexually assaulted them. But they're claiming they've waited all these years and they're part of the file. So we have actual victim, if you want to call them victim, testimony of what took place during those Epstein files. It does mention Donald Trump. I think everybody's kind of resigned now to know that his name is in the files. But again, in the same mention that I've been to a bar with somebody else and I know who they are, but I'm not somebody who actually, they're not in my inner circle. So I think that Trump doesn't have anything to worry about. But like anybody, you absolutely don't want your name mentioned in the same breath as Epstein. And I don't blame Donald Trump for being concerned with that. Donna says, does being in the files means the person was there? I've never heard any mention that Donald Trump was at Epstein's townhouse where most of the crimes occurred. I've not heard any mention of Donald Trump being at Epstein Island. All of the mentions that I've heard were from a really long time ago, prior to 2008, when Donald Trump says that Epstein hit on his friend's like 14-year-old daughter and he banned him from Mar-a-Lago, never spoke to him again. And so I think that Donald Trump's name is probably mentioned from prior to 2008. And then after 2008, he never talked to him again, never had anything to do with him. At that point, he kind of realized, hey, this guy is committing crimes, he's harming people, he's a pedophile. I'm going to move away from him. And if you're familiar with Donald Trump, as I know you are, then you know that that sounds very much in his character to say, hey, I socialized with him, not in my inner circle, but we ran in the same crowds, and that was the furthest extent. But I don't blame Donald Trump for being worried, because a lot of people aren't going to believe him. They're going to hear, oh, Donald Trump's name is in the file, he must have been guilty. I think that's exactly why he told Bill O'Reilly that, hey, there's a lot of names in these files. There's a lot of names on that list, the investigative list of innocent people. And if we release those names, it's going to harm people who are innocent, probably because he himself knows that that is his name also, amongst many others, and that he himself never did anything wrong. And there's a lot of other people on those lists who never did anything wrong. They were just guilty by association, just like we've been told from our parents from the day we're born. Always be careful for guilt by association. I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation with my son where I say, be careful who you hang out with, because if they do something wrong, even though you didn't do anything wrong, you're going to have that guilt by association. And I think a lot of the names in the Epstein files, we probably know who most of those names already are going to be guilt by association, not people who've actually, acted out, in some of these pedophilia, situations. And I certainly don't think Donald Trump did. But now the bigger story is that now that, again, that little cat's out of the bag, we know Donald Trump is in those files. Now we can concentrate on what actually is in the files. We know Donald Trump is in there. We know he didn't do anything wrong. We know it's guilt by association. So let's move. I lost my headset. So let's move past that and concentrate on the people who really are in the files, in which it's more than just guilt by association. What are we going to do with those people? How are we going to handle those files? And I do think we're going to find out. I think we're going to get a lot of information coming forward. And I think we're finally going to start seeing some of what actually took place. And when we have to. I know, like for Donald Trump, it was probably ripping a Band-Aid off. I don't want people to know this information because they're going to assume the worst. But now that we know, let's move forward. Let's find out. Now, since that time, Donald Trump has continued to say, oh, it's a hoax, it's a scam, just as bad as Russiagate. That's because he knows they're trying to place the blame on him. They've deleted the files of the real people. But now, you know what? He's ready to move forward. He is doing his best to move forward and to make sure that those files are released, that we do know the truth. And I know it probably was not, we think of Donald Trump as obviously our president, of a great leader, of all the fantastic things he's done for us, but he's also a human. And he also has emotions. He's also vulnerable. And I think we saw a moment of vulnerability where he was going through a lot. I mean, he lost his good friend, Elon Musk. And then he was going through this situation where he knows, excuse me, the media is about to turn against him and twist this case against him. Of course, he doesn't want that information to be released. But now that we know, we're seeing a lot of progress being made, aren't we? And now what's even better is, remember how Democrats before were saying, oh, let's release the files. They're backtracking on that. Now we have Democrats coming out and saying, nope, do not give them the transcripts from the grand jury. Do not release the files. Do not hear testimony from Maxwell, because now that they know that the cat's out of the bag and Donald Trump was only guilty by association, they don't want the real truth to be known. And so now we've got to push things a little bit further. Yeah, Kim says she tells her girls the same thing, because it's very true. Guilt by association is a real thing. Not too long ago, somebody came up to me and they said, oh, I thought you were involved with some stuff that this other person was doing. And I'm like, wait a minute, what in the world gave you that impression? And they're like, well, I've seen you, with these people. I'm like, no, absolutely 100% not. I am for the law. I abide by the law. But that's exactly what guilt by association is. And that's why you have to be so careful who you're seen with, so careful what you're doing, so careful what you say. And I'm going to certainly, I don't really go out that much anymore, but I know I'm going to be more mindful going forward because you just don't know what other people are observing and what their minds jump to. And I think that's the same situation here, of course, with Donald Trump. Larry says a lot of Democrats are going to be implicated in the files. That's very obvious. It is, Larry. And I think it was 40 FBI agents, have come forward and talked about the collusion and the things that are going on, and not only how they deleted some of these Epstein files, but how they were told, by the Biden administration to do what they could to go against Donald Trump. So we're going to learn a lot of things. And I don't think it's going to be anything we didn't already know. I think it's going to be a lot of validation of what we already knew. We already knew the FBI and the Department of Justice was weaponized against Donald Trump. And that scans a very large scope between false accusations going back into many different areas. We know that they've deleted a lot of files in the Epstein cases. We know that they've made up charges against Donald Trump that weren't true. Then we're going to figure out how far did it go? Are we going to see this accountability? We've talked a lot about accountability this week. And I'll tell you, before we're done, I'm going to play at the very end. You don't have to stay for it towards the end because I'm going to play a little clip from Candace Owens, who, by the way, is being sued by Macron and his wife, Brigitte Macron. And Candace Owens has doubled down that Brigitte is truly a man. Not only is she truly a man, but that she was a 39-year-old teacher who somehow lured in a 14-year-old Macron. So we're going to talk about that at the end of the show. I know not everybody cares about that, but I do. And Larry says, I wonder if Obama is in the files. I've never heard Obama's name mentioned when it comes to Epstein. And I think the reason why is because Epstein dealt with women. There weren't a lot of, I've not really read any that I can recall Epstein files in which young boys were mentioned or men were trafficked. And so I've never heard Obama's name. Now, you're going to find Obama's name in the circles in which little boys and men were being trafficked, not little girls and women, because I'm pretty convinced that Obama doesn't like women or little girls. And I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but I think you'll find that that's true. And Obama's name was allegedly mentioned 17 times in the Diddy investigation, 17 different times. And that is because if you look at that whole world, we should talk about that someday again. In that whole world of P. Diddy, they didn't really do a lot of trafficking of women and little girls. They did a lot of trafficking of men and little boys. That's what the whole Diddy investigation about. Yes, there was some instances of women being trafficked, but it was mostly the crimes committed against little boys and men, where they would drug men and sexually assault them, drug, young boys and sexually assault them. And so Obama's name came up in that case. And that's exactly where I would expect it to come up, not in Epstein. He didn't care about Epstein. Obama's not looking to molest any 13-year-old little girls. But Diddy files, most definitely. And I'm really sorry to say that, and I'm sorry if I offend anyone, but that's actually a fact that Obama's name came up 17 times in the Diddy files. And as far as I know, didn't even come up once in the Epstein files. Joe Biden's name came up, no surprise there, but not Epstein. But I want to talk again a little bit about what they've done to Donald Trump, and of course, why Donald Trump is going after Obama, Hillary Clinton. Again, Bill Clinton already allegedly subpoenaed in this case. We know there's a lot of other names, Comey, Brennan, a lot of folks going to get subpoenaed. I want you to listen to this because this is very telling to me what exactly they did to Donald Trump. Now, I think if Donald Trump really pursues these charges against I have not heard a lot of mention, like I said yesterday, of the Bidens, but against Obama and the Clintons, he does definitely have a good case. I still have a feeling that no one's ever going to be accountable or go to jail. Dave Elias was on the line or on the show yesterday in the comment line and said, nope, they're going to go to jail. So I hope so. We'll see. I'm not confident in it because as much as we want accountability, we've never seen it happen. But I want you to see this little interview, and you can just go to see how much they hated Donald Trump It was a lot. Take a look at this.
And what I've suggested, if now, because he's the nominee for the party, and he's entitled to briefings from the CIA, for example, I said publicly, give him fake briefings. Pretend you're briefing him. Don't tell him anything that you don't want to get out.
But as a Republican nominee, isn't he entitled to get those briefings?
Give him fake briefings.
What does that even mean?
It means they'll tell him stuff. He won't know the difference.
You're basically telling the intelligence community to lie to him.
No, you know, I'm not going to lie to you, but I just don't have to tell you everything. Oh, I said publicly, give him fake briefings.
Fake briefings. Now, I mean, can you imagine? Oh, sorry. Can't get myself back. My little computer's starting to mess up.
Oh, shit.
We'll just watch that while we're at it. I played that at the beginning of the show. We'll watch it again.
I'm fine. Put me down. Hillary, put me down.
That is pretty darn funny. I hit that button by accident. Sometimes my buttons can be a little funny on the show. And so we'll see. But you could see what Harry Reid said. Can you imagine that that's how they felt about Donald Trump, that they said, give him fake briefings? The TDS is real. They didn't trust Donald Trump. They didn't like Donald Trump. It was really us they don't trust and us they don't like, because we know we're onto their gig. But that was Harry Reid saying, let's give Donald Trump fake briefings. Because when you're a candidate for president leading up into the vote, you're allowed to have those briefings. You know, once you're elected prior to your inauguration, you were brought into those briefings. And because you need to know what's going on in the country, you're allowed to have that classified information. And Harry Reid, right there, very clearly, that's not AI, saying, let's give him fake briefings very publicly. So I certainly see where Donald Trump has a case. I really do. And I think that there's a lot of other information out there. We'll hear a lot of other people talking to where we can prove that, hey, what they're trying to do to Donald Trump is pretty darn messed up, isn't it? Pretty darn messed up. And it's not about him. We've always known that this is really about us, the American people. You know, Donald Trump represents us. He is in this position to represent us, to make this country great again. And that's the last thing they want, because that interferes, with their 30-year agenda. He already put a big dent in that, caused a lot of damage to their 30-year plan back when in his prior term. And now Donald Trump learned a lesson back in that time period. And I think he did learn a lesson. And again, yesterday, I keep saying that I don't expect accountability. I don't expect any arrests. And again, Dave was on the comment line, said, no, you're wrong. There will be arrests. We're going to see Obama arrested. And I hope that's true if these people are held accountable. And I know there's certainly the evidence is there. There is no question the evidence is there. And they have done nothing but lie to us all along, made us feel like we were crazy, tinfoil wearing hat conspiracy theorists. Remember that? And we were right all along. As a matter of fact, yesterday we talked about Hillary Clinton. Remember how yesterday we said about the tranquilizers that she was this psycho-emotional mess, and they had to keep her on very heavy tranquilizers because she would go through these periods of manic episodes, from being really mean and hateful to extreme cheerfulness. Remember that? And I found the clip of her. Remember how we always said there was something wrong with her health? We talked about this yesterday. And I'm like, yeah, remember when she passed out at that rally? I'm not making fun of Hillary Clinton for her health issues. God knows, I don't wish that on anyone. But I did find that clip. And they told us we were crazy, remember? So take a look at this clip here. There's no sound. So here she is, her handlers holding her up. She goes to get into the van and collapses. And you remember when they told us, oh, she was fine, nothing happened, her little shoe fell off. And they told us we were crazy. Do you remember that? And there we are again. But now the difference is we know we were actually right all along. But how many times have we been right? I would say we're probably about 99 out of 100 and being right on every single thing we thought was going on. Good morning, Curtis. We were right on everything that was going on. Larry says, supposedly TD Jake's pastor is in the files for P. Diddy files. Again, Larry, we're going to talk about that another day because I'll tell you what, I've always thought that rappers were like mean, violent gangsters and all this gangster rap. Then it turns out they're all actually just a bunch of gay men out looking for, boys. It's not funny. I'm sorry to laugh, but it kind of reminds me one time when I was on the show Cancel This and even back as far as The Edge. And I used to tease Vic and Eric Johnson saying that all the old hair bands were actually just gay because they ran around, with their long hair and their girl earrings and their girl clothes and their lipstick and eyeshadow. And Eric would get furious. And he would say, no, that's just what they did back then. I'm like, yeah, because they were all gay. Look at Steven Tyler now. Look at some of these people now. I would say I'm right. He looks like an old woman now, doesn't he? And how many of them have since come out as gay? And I'm not poking fun at gay people. I have no issue with people who are gay at all. Zero. In fact, I wish every person who was gay would actually just tell us, hey, I'm gay. I'd be like, all right, well, I still like your music or I still like what you're doing. Don't care about your sexual preference. That's not my business. But I think we've been lied to in the arts world for a really long time when it came not only to a lot of those hair metal bands, but also, which I didn't listen to a lot of that music. I was more into the grunge and rock stuff. But then we have the mean rappers, the people who seem like, oh, they were gangsters and out killing people and do this stuff, and they were actually just a bunch of gay pedophiles. So we learned that through the P. Diddy files. Who would have ever thought? Donna, you remember that from the show? They would be furious with me for saying that. But I will stand by my opinion. I will stand by my opinion. And so, so back to Donald Trump. We're going to be talking a lot about Donald Trump in the coming shows because, man, things are unraveling very quickly against the Democrats. And I'm so glad. I was so upset about the Epstein files. I really was. I was furious. I didn't turn against Donald Trump, but I was getting to the point where I'm like, please explain yourself. Stop telling us it's a hoax. Stop telling us it's a scam without telling us why. Just tell us what's going on because we're adults. We can handle it. Just tell us the truth and show us the files, good and bad. Just let us know. And there was a time in my mind where I was kind of thinking, gosh, I don't think Elon Musk just threw that out there that Donald Trump is in the files just for no reason. When he said that, I thought, man, for him to say that, he probably knows a lot of things. He knows a lot of people. He's very involved in the Trump administration. Now, he shouldn't have said it, and he shouldn't have said it the way he did say it. And he did, after that, delete, his post. But it made me really start thinking about it. And I was kind of getting to the point where I'm thinking, man, is Trump, really in those files? Did he really do something he shouldn't have done? And he doesn't want us to know. So now all of a sudden he told Pam Bondi, do not release those files. Do not release those files because it will destroy our country. I'll lose all my followers. I really was kind of starting to think, and I hate it that I doubted him, and even doubted myself. And I'm glad that I waited it out before I went too far down the line. And now we see once again that, yes, Donald Trump's name is in those files. He disassociated with Epstein in 2008. I've not seen anything or any testimony yet with these different witnesses that Donald Trump ever sexually assaulted anyone. In the case a long time ago where he was accused of assaulting these two girls, again, we talked about that before. Both, one of them recanted the story. It was about drugs. It was about money. It was not about what Donald Trump really did. Because sometimes people do give false testimony. Jay says, I still think you're going to be disappointed over the Epstein files. You're right, Jay. I have no doubt. I'm trying to build myself back up, but I probably will be disappointed, not because of Donald Trump's involvement, but we're being told right now that the Department of Justice has 100,000 files related to the Epstein case that they refuse to release. Now, I understand that there's victims' names that need to be redacted. I understand there's certain things that can't be told, but I do have a lot of faith that we're going to find out at least a little bit more. I was really angry that we weren't getting any information. I think Donald Trump and his administration realize we're not going to just let it go. We're not going to let it go. You can tell us to let it go. You can gaslight us, and they did do some gaslighting. but we're not going to let it go. And so, therefore, I think we are going to find out. Donna says there's a reason why Epstein killed himself. Do you really think he did, Donna? A lot of people are really on the line about that. Is he really dead? Is he alive? A lot of people have video of him. I know somebody personally who absolutely believes they saw Maxwell at the same home that she had been discovered hiding out at since she was supposed to be in jail. Now, she's at this low security prison. She could have breaks. I don't know. But this person lives near that house and has driven by, and they claim they've seen her outside the house, since this time when she's supposed to be in prison. We don't know. We just don't know what really goes on behind the scenes. We know that special rules are made for special people. What will Maxwell say? I don't know. I don't have a lot of hope in what Maxwell has to say. And the reason why is because it can go a lot of different directions. Now, the Trump Department of Justice, Todd Blanche could try to make a deal with Maxwell. She's up for appeal right now. I think her final documents had to be submitted by July 14th, and she's up for appeal. So she's got to be very careful. She doesn't want to implicate herself further because then, of course, her appeal is going to be denied. However, they could make a deal with her and say, all right, if you give us information on Joe Biden, on the Clintons, on Bill Gates, on all of these people, then we will grant you your appeal somehow. It's easy to say, oh, that's not, you can't do that. You can't give somebody, a yes on an appeal. You can't go to the jail and let this person free. Those are just rules. The rules are broken all of the time. They can do anything they want to do. Trust me, they can do anything they want to do. So if they can make a good enough deal with Maxwell, I do think that there's some hope for her being released early, or they'll make some kind of deal for her. But that has to be a good deal. It has to be a good deal. She has to implicate some people. Donald Trump right now, he is going to go hard after Obama, after the Clintons. I hope at some point he goes hard after the Bidens. And I think we're going to see a lot going on. I think you guys are right. August, September, particularly the September, whenever Congress is back in session, we'll see what happens. Tammy says, not Donald Trump. And I'm not sure what you mean, Tammy, not Donald Trump in what respect. And Tammy says, I read a Democrat judge is blocking it. Yes, a Democrat judge is, well, okay, let me backtrack, Tammy. I believe that in the beginning, not now, in the beginning, that Donald Trump did block us from seeing the Epstein files. I really do believe that. I think, and well, it's not that I just believe it. He's pretty much said if those files are released, there's a lot of innocent people who are going to be accused of doing things that they didn't do, who are really innocent, but their names are just mentioned. Now, since that time, of course, Donald Trump has changed his tune, and he told Pam Bondi, go ahead, get the transcripts from the grand jury. And yes, a Democrat judge has blocked those transcripts that the grand jury was going to release. So that part is absolutely correct. Donald Trump now, once again, is on the right side of things, wanting as well to release those files, what we can release. Carlene says, of course his name's in the file, but not that he did anything wrong, like the left tries to make it out. You are absolutely correct, Carlene. Absolutely 100,000 times correct. Carlene says, I can't wait until the files are released and the left sees all the evidence against the Democrats. I am with you 100%, Carlene. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see. And I think Donald Trump now sees it the same way we do, that yes, we know now, his supporters know his name is in the files, but not in a sexually creepy sort of way. That his name, like so many others that were just in loose circles with Epstein, are listed in the files, but not in, again, a creepy, sexually assaulted type of way. So now he's like, all right, let's get on board. Let's give the people what they want. And I'm like, Jay, I don't think we're going to get everything we want, but I think we're going to get some validation somewhere down the line. Now, that being said, I don't have a lot of time left. I swear today I was going to be done by 9 o'clock, but I never am because I just talk too much. So one of the things I'm going to touch base on before we head out, we're going to talk more, of course, about all of this next week. There's probably going to be a lot to develop between now and then. Things are moving fairly rapidly, a lot of discovery, being released, a lot of information coming out in those files that are being, sent out to Americans for public viewing. and how Obama, the Clintons, etc., the FBI, we've got all that testimony now from 40 different law enforcement officials saying, yes, there was collusion that took place against Donald Trump. There wasn't anything we could do about it, but we were told by our leaders that we had to go against Donald Trump. So we're going to learn a lot more as the days go on when people are a little bit more comfortable in coming forward and telling us the truth. So we'll talk a lot about that next week. Now, before we head out, this may not be of interest to all of you, but Candace Owens, as you guys know, that this is turning into be, I think somewhere down the road, this is going to be one of the biggest scandals that has unfolded globally. And you may not agree with me, but I think it's a fairly interesting situation that's taking place. Good morning, Mel. It's good to see you this morning. And Mel says Mel Gibson is working on a 4-part documentary about Diddy and Epstein, as he should. And I will be one of the first people to watch that. Mel Gibson is always on the right side of things. And yeah, because we have 2 pedophile rings. One, you know what? Let me backtrack for a second, and then I'm going to move on to Candace Owens. Think about that. 2 elite pedophile rings. They had divided themselves up between Epstein, the pedophile ring that goes after women and little girls, Diddy, the pedophile ring that goes after men and little boys. Think about that. The pedophiles did their own dividing. They divided themselves up into 2 separate groups doing the exact same thing on either side. It is kind of interesting now, isn't it? And no doubt that people will be making books and movies about that. You know, it's interesting that if they do one that's together, 2 of the same groups, just after different types of people. So people have divided themselves up between those groups, no question. Now, as far as Candace Owens goes, now, if you recall, Candace Owens started this campaign quite some time ago. I don't know where it came from, quite honestly. I think that she started this out maybe trying to prove that pedophiles have been within our global government for a very long time. Now, I've always known the situation with France's President Macron, Emmanuel Macron. I've always known the story that his wife is much older than him, that at one time she was his school teacher, and that he was a young kid and he met his teacher, fell in love with her, and then after he graduated, they, got married. That's always been a story. I don't know of anyone that's denied it or tried to hide that. Well, Candace Owens somehow, I think was back in time talking about pedophilia and how in these different governments around the world, there's a lot of pedophilia that has taken place for a really long time, that it's not really something new, that there's, a lot of people accuse Michelle Obama as really being Big Mike, right? I don't know if that's true or not. I honestly have no idea. And so I think that Candace Owens started that out like, okay, well, we talk about Obama and Big Mike all the time. Well, look what's happening over in France. And her reasoning has always been and she's got a lot of evidence. I mean, a lot of evidence that Brigitte Macron is actually a man, and not only a man, but I'm almost thinking she's trying to tie it as being also, I don't know. I'm kind of not sure 100% where she's going with this. I'm going to show you a little bit of the video in a minute. But then what happened is Donald Trump had one of his advisors call Candace Owens and tell her, stop talking about Macron and Brigitte and calling Brigitte a man, because we're trying to work out this deal, a peace deal over in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia. And Macron is telling us he is not going to work any type of peace deal until somebody shuts up Candace Owens. And so then, because it's very personal to Macron that Brigitte is being called a man by Candace Owens. So Candace Owens finds out that Donald Trump was on the line, that Donald Trump had his advisor call. And not only did he have him call, but he was on the line listening the entire time. Well, Candace is not somebody to give in. And I have to say, there was a couple times in this situation where I thought maybe she was crazy, but I don't think she's crazy. I just think she's got a lot of evidence that Brigitte Macron actually is a man, because she is doubling down. So she continued on. Now, what happened, and I think what prompted that call to her, was that she came across a doctor. Now, this doctor that she interviewed was an associate doctor with a man who was a doctor, 2 doctors. The first doctor was the doctor who allegedly performed the transgender surgery on Brigitte Macron. And the associate doctor interviewed that guy's doctor partner. I know I'm going to get everybody all mixed up with the way I'm saying it. The second doctor interviewed with Candace Owens and gave testimony to Candace Owens that yes, my former partner did, provide this surgery, gender changing surgery to Brigitte Macron. And then the next thing you know, the doctor that interviewed with Candace Owens fell to his death from a, I don't know how many stories up window. This was just like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And so then this interview came out that Candace had been talking to this doctor, and this doctor gave evidence to Candace that Brigitte really was a man. Well, Candace, of course, received that call from President Trump's advisor. She said, I am not backing down. The truth needs to be exposed. So at that time, Brigitte and Emmanuel Macron filed a lawsuit against Candace Owens. Now, this just happened a couple days ago. And I'm just going to play you just the tiniest brief moment of Candace Owens talking about this lawsuit, but she is not caving in. She is absolutely not caving in. She says that she has irrefutable proof that not only is Brigitte Macron a man, but back in the day when little Emmanuel Macron was 14 years old, that this man who is now Brigitte Macron was a school teacher, a cross-dressing transvestite school teacher who was 39 years old, who sexually lured little Emmanuel Macron, into a relationship when Macron was only 14, and of course the teacher being 39, to the extent where Emmanuel Macron's parents took him out of the school, moved him to a completely different school, yet somehow these two still got together. And if you look at Brigitte Macron, I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. She is kind of strange looking, quite honestly. It's clear she's wearing a wig. It could just be because she's a lot older than Macron, a lot older. So I'm going to find this. I hope I saved it. I'm going to find this tape. Here we go. Of Candace Owens doubling down. I'm playing this. I want to know what you think. I really want to know what you think. And does it really matter? Does this prove that pedophilia has been okayed in certain governments? Let's look at this real quick.
You were born a man and you will die a man. That's the point I'm making. So give us a sample. I'll send my doctors to take your blood. Figure it out real quick, however you want to go about this. Hey, how about just giving us some pictures again of you growing up, raising your children? That would be fine. For whatever reason, to phone, by the way, like I said, we'll get to the bottom of it, right? That is what Discovery is for. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. You're probably hoping, this will go away, and at least we'll say we sued her. We'll say we went after her. She'll probably file for this to get dismissed. I'd like to make it to Discovery. I think that we owe that to the world. Anyways, you guys, we are revolting against this. We're revolting against the perverts that run the world. And I want to be very clear here. I count you among them. I think you're sick. I think you're disgusting. And I am fully prepared to take on this battle on behalf of the entire world. Okay? That's what I'm going to say.
And so Jay said, well, what's the end game? If it's true, what's the end game? Jay, the end game is that pedophilia not only does it exist, but it is become acceptable. It's become the norm. I mean, think about that. The president of France potentially being a victim of pedophilia when he was only 14 years old, and then goes on to marry the person that groomed him, who is now Brigitte Macron. I mean, it just goes to show that this pervertedness has carried on for a long time, and it's being flaunted in front of our face as being completely normal. Now, if this situation is true, then he needs to be removed from the presidency. And it's a shame if he truly was a victim at the age of 14, but it does need to be exposed. All pedophilia needs to be exposed. And that's not even to mention the lies that are being told to the people of France. But more than anything, on a global stage, it just goes to show the normalization of pedophilia. I do think it's very important. And that's why I said this is probably going to be one of the biggest scandals that we have seen in a very long time, if in fact it is true that Brigitte Macron is truly a man and that she truly did groom little Emmanuel Macron when he was only 14 years old. It is a huge, huge, huge story. And Joe says, not kinda, very strange looking. Agreed, Joe, agreed. But the only thing I guess in my mind to play the devil's advocate was that if you think about it, when Macron was 14, if he was 39, that's a big age difference. That's a really big age difference. Now, I've not looked this up. I don't know how old, Emmanuel Macron is right now. I don't know how old Brigitte claims to be. But it could explain why she looks so strange. She could be like 90 years old and wearing a wig to try to look, more youthful. But if you see her running around, she is a very interesting character. Now, Candace Owens, and I'm not going to show these to you. I do have them. I'm not going to show them to you. But Candace Owens has been, again, doubling down, tripling down. She's posted video. She's posted photos of Brigitte Macron, very much looking like she has male genitals. So I'm not going to get into that. It's a little more, even on a Friday, than I care to show or get into. A lot like they were doing with Michelle Obama and some of the videos and photos that we've seen. But with Brigitte, it just seems a little bit more interesting. So the moral of the story is that they are trying to flaunt pedophilia. They're trying to normalize it by electing somebody as the president and first lady of a country who was actually in this pedophilic situation. So we'll talk more about that as the story unfolds. It is almost 9:30. It is time for me to go. Mel says TPV has even more proof it's all true. Yeah, Mel, I have seen a lot of information out there. I believe it's true. I can't say that for Michelle Obama. I've not seen any irrefutable proof about Michelle Obama. I think there's a lot of weirdness with the Obamas. Like I said the other day, I absolutely do think Obama was born in Kenya. I do think his name was Barry. I've done a lot of research on the Obamas, so much, in fact, I stopped because I got nowhere. It's very strange that there are no classmates who went to school with Barack Obama. There are no distant cousins. There's no family members. There's no one who seems to know him, who has stories to tell about him. There's no one who grew up with Michelle Obama who talks about it. There's no one who talked about the daughters when they were babies. There's a lot of missing pieces to the puzzle. All of a sudden, this guy just appears in Chicago and, running for office and is part of this public allies, in which he comes out and says that he wants to create an army of civilians just as powerful and just as equally armed as the United States military. No coincidences in this situation. So there's a lot going on in both of those situations. But either way, guys, that is it for me today. Lots more to talk about next week. I'm so happy again. It's Friday. I'm so tired. I have to work all weekend, believe it or not. The movie business is very busy right now. I don't know if any of you are heading out on Sunday to the High Point to see Soul on Fire, a local movie. I can't get into the details, but there is a big screening that's going to take place at the High Point Theater on Sunday. I will be there all day, 7 a.m. till who knows what time at night. Busy, busy weekend for me. But I do hope you guys have a really fantastic weekend. Stay cool, stay out of the hot sun, stay out of the heat. And then next week, it's going to cool off quite a bit. If you guys come up with any good stories, please be sure to send them to me. Always happy to hear what you have to say, what you want to talk about. But outside of that, I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. I will look forward to seeing you all on Monday. Have a good